If you are, every Wednesday we send out a weekly email, just kind of a, hey, here's what's coming up this week at the church, maybe some new events, recurring events, et cetera, et cetera. If you get that email, you know that Pastor Pete is supposed to be up here in our God Is series. Is supposed to talk about God is big. Wednesday, so Wednesday morning, I get he was on vacation with his family, and I get a text from him early Wednesday morning. I wake up and I have this text, and he says, "Hey, my oldest son Timothy," which it started with Autumn getting sick, and then anyway, my oldest son Timothy isn't feeling good. I think he has COVID, but it's all right. The rest of us are doing okay. And I said, all right, well, you come home in a couple of days. What does that do to travel plans? He goes, it'll be fine. I get a text Thursday morning. Yeah, T has COVID, and I'm not feeling so hot. You better get a plan B. Now, that coming out of the words of your senior pastor is like the worst thing that an administrative pastor can hear is when your senior says get a plan B and you don't actually have a plan B in place yet. A good administrator would have had a plan B, especially knowing that his boss was leaving the country. So lesson learned. And so as I get this, and he says, get a plan B, and it's Thursday, and I'm going through the Rolodex of options in my mind about, how am I going to get out of this? I relented to the fact that it's time, Jason. You got to go deep into the bullpen. And so tonight you get me. I hope you're not all too disappointed. But to close the loop on this, Pete's back in the country. He's got COVID. He's all right. He ain't feeling good, but he's feeling good enough to text me that the Raiders ain't doing so hot right now. So, and props to him. The Bears won, so I don't have a leg to stand on. But with all that, let me say, Pete is a gift in so many ways. He's a gifted leader. He's a talented speaker. He's an amazing pastor, and maybe most of all, he does not mind writing sermons. Right? I've watched the guy crank out sermons in just a couple of days, and where Pete is able to do that, it takes me the better part of a week to be able to do that. And so I had to go deep into the archives, so to speak, and grab a message that I did about 2.5 years ago on Psalm 23. And I've made some adjustments to this particular message, but it's deeply personal to me tonight. And so I wanted to share Psalm 23 with you. It's one that I have pressed into multiple times over the years, even more so over these last 4.5 months. It's a psalm that consists of just 6 verses, but it's so rich in truth. And so I'm going to start by reading it here in its entirety, and then we'll break it down from there. Normally, as you know, if you've been here at City Church for any amount of time, we typically speak out of the NIV version of the Bible, the New International Version. I really like how the ESV, the English Standard Version, is printed when it comes to Psalm 23. So that's the one I'm going to be referring to here. And it goes like this. It says that the Lord is my shepherd and I shall not want, that he makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. And your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies, and you anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. And surely the goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And so throughout the Old Testament, the Lord is referred to in a number of different ways. We see the God Most High. We see the Creator. We see the All-Sufficient One. We see the Lord will provide. We see the Lord who heals. And obviously here we see that the Lord is my shepherd. And what we know is the author of this particular psalm is David, King David, in fact. And David, when he penned this psalm, was most likely the king over Israel at the time that he wrote this. But the other thing that we know about David, he was also, in his younger days, in his boyhood, his late adolescence, teen years, he was a shepherd boy. And so here in the opening verse of this psalm, David writes that the Lord is my shepherd. And what I find interesting about this is David doesn't say that the Lord is my king, right? He's the King of Kings. Jesus is the King of Kings. But to refer to the Lord of all heaven and earth, it would seem so appropriate to say the Lord is my king. But instead he writes the Lord is my shepherd. And what's interesting about that is that the work of a shepherd was not glamorous on any level. In fact, it was considered to be really the lowest of all works. if a family needed a shepherd for their flock, it was typically the youngest boy who got the honor, quote unquote, of being assigned this particular duty. And as he got older, he would transition out of being a shepherd. He would go to work with his father in the field as a farmer, and he would help with the sowing and the plowing and the harvesting the family crops. And while still not glamorous work, it was considered to be a higher status, if you will, than that of a shepherd. And so as the boy who functioned in the role of the shepherd would get older, then ultimately he would get promoted. The job of the shepherd would then be assigned to the next youngest brother in line, and then the process would, obviously rinse and repeat. So typically, because the shepherd was not a hired hand, but a family member, it was in the shepherd's best interest to also care and protect the flock at all costs, because the flock was an asset to his family, to his livelihood. So the shepherd would lead his flock each and every day out to wherever area was the sheep were to be pastured. He would provide for them in terms of nourishment and rest. He guided them. He led them. He would lead them where they needed to go. He was intimately involved with the flock, and he was concerned for the safety of each individual sheep. He was willing, if it came to it, to sacrifice his own comfort and even his own life for the sake of his sheep. And what I find interesting about this is that the shepherd, as he would lead his sheep, the shepherd would take point. He would lead the flock. He would not lead his flock to a place where he first did not go himself. The Lord is my shepherd. And the shepherd knew his sheep individually. And he goes, as he goes, he's calling out to his sheep. And they were following his lead. And while at the same time they were following the sound of his voice, the sheep know the voice of their shepherd. They know the voice of their protector. We see in Jesus chapter 10. John chapter 10. It's been a while since I've been up here, in case you couldn't tell. John writes, Jesus is saying that my sheep listen to my voice, and I know them, and they follow me, and I give them eternal life. And they shall never perish, and no one will snatch them out of the hand of my Father. My Father who has given them to me is greater than all, and no one can snatch them out of my Father's hand. I and the Father are one. So Jesus knows each and every one of us intimately. He knows us by name. He knows our hearts. He knows our struggles, our desires, our fears, our dreams, our frustrations. Jesus is our good shepherd, and regardless of where we find ourselves, we can be assured that he will never lead us where he first doesn't go. And that's an important fact to keep in mind for when we get to verse 4 and we talk about the journey through the valley. And so how do we get to know the voice of God? How do we get to know people? We spend intentional time with them, don't we? We engage in conversation with them, and then if we want to get to know them better, we pursue them. We learn the sound of our shepherd's voice by spending intentional time in his written word and in prayer, and we learn the truth of who he is. And that's important because in the darkest times when our emotions are running rampant, lies will oftentimes try and present themselves as truth. And it's so important that we know the truth before those dark times inevitably come. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And so the shepherd provides for all the needs of the flock in regards to food, in regards to water and safety. And the Hebrew word that David uses here is Jehovah Ra. And it's got a few meanings, one of which is shepherd. And I believe that, as I have looked at this psalm, I believe that's the way that David intended it, but at the same time, because in the same way a shepherd protects his flock, so God protects his children, yes? But in an extended translation, the word Ra, Jehovah Ra, means friend. It means companion. And so this reinforces the intimacy that God desires between himself and his children. Just as Jehovah Ra can be translated as the Lord is my shepherd, it can also be translated as the Lord is my friend. We continue on to verse 2. David writes that he makes me lie down in green pastures and he leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. Now, God's provisions are never seasonal. right? As we walk out of summer and we get ready to go into fall, and then the leaves kind of die off and the grass begins to wither. The pastures are always green. God's provisions are never seasonal. And I understand, trust me, I understand that it doesn't always feel that way, especially when we journey through the valley. But what David is referring to here is rest. You see, we live in a very fast-paced world. Oftentimes, I think it's faster than it needs to be, and it's probably, if we were to be honest, it's probably faster than what we can handle. I remember a few years ago, my daughter Samaya, she was a freshman in high school, and she gets frustrated with my wife, with Andrea, and I, in the midst of trying to, I'll tell you that we were trying to help her study for this biology test, and we're sitting there at our dining room table, and we're trying to have this conversation. We're trying to help her, whatever this particular subject was in biology, trying to help her to just kind of wrap her mind around it. And we begin to see her eyes gloss over, and you can see the wheels in her head begin to start coming to a grinding halt, and the smoke coming out of the ears, and then slowly the tears begin to trickle from her eyes. And so we stopped, and we just asked her, "Hey, Smyra, what's going on?" She blurts out, "You don't know what it's like to be in the ninth grade." And I said, "Okay." But there's some truth to that. You see, there are some pressures that she faced in her freshman year. They didn't exist 30 years ago. I know what ninth grade was like for me in the 92-93 school year. But at the same time, Sir Harris, right, I don't know what ninth grade was like for her in this world. And now she's a senior. She's got new pressures that she has in front of her that I didn't have, that Andrea didn't have. Right? She's starting her, crying out loud, this girl starts her senior year without her mama. We have so much pulling, so much stuff that's pulling for our attention these days. And I feel like when I go to bed at night, I just got to do kind of a once over on myself to make sure I didn't somehow miraculously grow a USB port on myself. And we're just so constantly plugged into technology. We live in a world where information and entertainment is literally at our fingertips. It's at the touch of a button, and we become conditioned to instant results and instant satisfaction. You know, Pastor Mike, our founding pastor, he would say the microwave moves too slow for us these days. You click this or download that or stream that or use this app. I mean, it's everywhere. I remember the first time I heard the term FOMO. I was meeting with someone, and they go, "Well, you see, I got FOMO." What in the world is FOMO? Who knows what FOMO is? Who's heard of FOMO? Okay, a lot. Fear of missing out, right? Apparently that's a thing. And either maybe introverts don't really care about it, or I'm just too old to care. I prefer to think it's the former, but there's so much going on around us all the time, and it's created in us this expectation that we can't miss any of it. We've got to be involved. We've got to be in the know. And we have this technology that's readily available to us, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, so much of it is very good. It's very beneficial. Apple Maps actually wasn't very beneficial. I was using Apple Maps the other day as trying to navigate construction downtown to find this tattoo shop, and it actually got me lost because it couldn't find me all of a sudden. But give me 7, 8. I got to keep up with Nathan and Pete. So give me 7, 8 months. I'll have a sleeve here. But the technology failed me. And when we begin to let technology control us, we begin to let life, the things of life control us, we can run into trouble. Would you agree with me that life by its very nature is already hard enough without any outside help? Some of you would. The rest of you will get there. Add to all of that an increasing speed at which society runs and the increasing demands that come with it. And we somehow find ourselves that we've gotten onto this merry-go-round that we realize all of a sudden it's not very merry. And at first, it looked fun. Looking from the outside, everyone else is involved. FOMO, I got to get on. It reminds me of a trip. I went to Silverwood over this summer with a friend of mine, and we stopped at the Ferris wheel. And I said, "Oh, look at that, it's the Ferris wheel. I haven't been on the Ferris wheel in years." And so we get on the Ferris wheel. I said, let's do it. I get on this thing, and I was instantly reminded why it's been years since I've been on a Ferris wheel. The scariest 10 minutes of my life, especially when the person you're on there with starts, doing this bit. It's like, don't rock it. Quit rocking that thing. And so we find ourselves on this merry-go-round or this Ferris wheel, and now that we're on it, we're hanging on for dear life because we're afraid to let go. We're afraid of flying off, afraid of getting left behind, getting forgotten, getting hurt. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 11, he said, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. To take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and I am humble in heart, and you will find rest. You will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." You see, when a farmer needed a yoke for his ox, he would hire a carpenter to craft this yoke, because understand, a yoke had to be custom made to be a very specific size and shape and dimensions for the specific oxen that would be carrying it. A well-fitted yoke would allow an entire team of ox to pull to its fullest potential. But a poorly fitted yoke, one that was just slapped on, that wasn't designed for a specific ox, would cause discomfort. In fact, it could injure the animal. It would not. It would hamper the team from functioning it to its full potential. And so Jesus says to take my yoke upon you, right? The yoke that Jesus has for you, for me, it's been custom made for us. And we become weary and we become burdened when we take this ill-fitted yoke of life, when we carry it around and we fail to take up the yoke that Jesus has made for us. And so Jesus is the shepherd, and his sheep know his voice and follow him. And when we come to him and we follow him, we find rest for our souls. But what's more, though, is that he also restores our souls. There's a book called by Pastor John Ortberg called Soul Keeping. And it's a great book. I highly recommend it. And in this book, Pastor John, he talks about how the soul, just kind of 10,000 foot view here, really, the soul is the integration of our mind and our body and will, that all of these things together make up our soul. And Pastor John writes that the cluttered soul becomes choked by worries. It becomes choked by the deceitfulness of wealth and the desire for other things. And when you're so busy, your soul will shrivel. That the busy soul, it gets attached to the wrong things because the soul is sticky. And that the Velcro of the soul is what Jesus calls desire. And it could be a desire for money. It could just be simply a desire for other things outside of the Lord. And then we mistake our clutter for life, that this is just the way that life is. And so where, church, are you finding your rest? How are you seeking restoration? And again, it has to come back to spending regular time with the Lord and seeking him and worshiping and praying and reading. This is how we find rest and restoration for our souls. We have to take the yoke of the Good Shepherd. Continuing in verse 3, David writes that he leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And so the shepherd was also a guide to his sheep, and he walked point. We've talked about that. He knew where to take them. He knew where the sheep needed to go, and so he would lead them there. But again, he led them by walking in front of them and calling to them, "Follow me." The sheep knew the sound of their shepherd's voice, and so they followed him, and they followed him because they trusted him. The Lord is my shepherd, and because of him, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down, he makes me rest, while providing safety and abundance. And he leads me beside still waters, and he restores my soul, and he leads me in paths of righteousness. You see, the Lord does all these things for me. He does all these things for you that we cannot possibly do on our own. And as a result, we don't need to worry about those things. We just simply need to trust and remain in his presence. And all that sounds real good and it sounds real wonderful, right? Lying in green meadows beside still waters, or maybe on a beach with an umbrella drink. Whatever your flavor is, it sounds wonderful. But then you see we get to verse 4. And it's because of verse 4 that we need to learn to do these things. Because verse 4 says that even though I walk through the valley of shadow of death. Now, David doesn't write if I walk through the valley of shadow of death. He says even though, because it's not a question it's not a question of if we will walk through those valleys. It's a question of when, because it's going to happen. And in this life, it's going to happen a lot, and it's going to happen to various degrees. And I think more often, maybe the question is, how long am I going to stay in this valley? And I know for me, that's a question that I've been asking God on almost a daily basis for the last 4.5 months. You see, valleys can be cold and they can be dark depending on their depth, and they can be full of twists and turns and that are difficult to navigate, because the mountains and the trees in the form of trials and circumstances and uncertainties and grief, it surrounds us, it encapsulates us, and we just can't, it's so hard to see what's in front of us. We've been blinded by the darkness. What used to be clear when we were high up on the mountaintops and we could see everything, it turns to fear and to confusion and to frustration, and we can find ourselves beginning to question if God even knows what He's doing. And family, as hard as it is, understand this: it is walking through the valley on that valley floor where true faith is built. When I first gave this message back in January of 20, right before COVID, my family was in a valley. You see, a few months earlier in November, Andrea, her lungs weren't wonderful because of her cystic fibrosis, and she was scheduled to have her gallbladder removed, actually on her birthday, November 18th. That was her birthday present. She got to go to surgery and get her gallbladder out. And removing a gallbladder, it's a pretty simple operation. I YouTubed it. And okay, let me just say this. If you're gonna, I had a dude procedure, okay? And I was curious, it's like, what, uh, what does this entail? So I YouTubed it. I've done a lot of stupid things in my life. That was probably the dumbest thing I've ever done. If you're gonna have surgery, don't YouTube it. Big mistake. But a gallbladder surgery, it's pretty simple. I mean, it took the surgeon literally start to finish his role about 20 minutes to get this thing out. But for Andrea, the fact that she had very poor lungs, the fact that she was on oxygen, there was a very legitimate concern that she was not going to be able to come off the ventilator after surgery. Now, ultimately, her operation was flawless, and she was able to be successfully extubated after surgery. But despite having this operation and her gallbladder is out, her cystic fibrosis continued to ravage her body in multiple ways, and her lungs continued to deteriorate. And again, we all experience valleys, and some valleys that we experience in our lives, they seem darker than others, right? Well, I'm in this valley, and it's darker than the one I went through a couple years ago. Maybe the valley I'm in now is not as bad as the one I was in a couple years ago. But I think when we're in that valley, we can find ourselves wondering, how bad can this actually get? And at the same time, really not ever wanting to know the answer to that question. And I think the worst that it can get is when our worst fear becomes realized, yes? For me, that was on April 22nd of this year at 3:50 in the afternoon, as I stood next to Andrea in the Sacred Heart ICU just brushing her hair, and I watched her take her final breath. You see, life as I knew it for the last 25 years took a dramatic shift, and the valley that I was already in got darker. And I remember in that first week, you're going to remember this, man. All I could seem to say was, I just don't know what I'm going to do. I just don't know what I'm going to do. And when the valley floor is at its darkest and the narrowest, it's easy to look around and wonder if have you forgotten about me? And we pray and we don't hear, and we can begin to question if God even cares. And fear and uncertainty begin to take over, and that in and of itself can open a door, and we can allow emotions and lies to then take over. You see, I'm in this valley, and what used to be so certain and what I knew to be true is becoming blurry, and now none of it even makes sense. And so somewhere a lie has begun to take hold. And this is why, going back to the earlier point, this is why it's so important to know the Word of God, because our emotions, family, hear me on this, our emotions oftentimes will betray us. But the truth of God is an immovable rock of truth. And when everything else is uncertain, God is certain. It's when we are surrounded by such darkness that it physically hurts that we must grab on and hold on to this truth like a rabid dog and never let go. Hebrews 10:35-36, it says, so do not throw away your confidence because it will be richly rewarded. And so you need to persevere so that when you have done the will of God, you will receive what he has promised. Now, the editors of the NIV translation, they use, in this context here, they use the word persevere. And in its original translation, the author of Hebrews used the Greek word, which I'm about to completely botch here, the Greek word of hupomene. And that word means patience. And we see the Apostle Paul, he uses this exact same word in his church in his letter to the church in Rome, when he wrote in chapter 5 that we also glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance, it produces patience. And that perseverance, that patience, develops character, and character, hope. And what does Paul say about hope? That hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. And this word patience, it can be so tricky. Because for many of us, we interpret the word patience as kind of like this hunkering down, and I just got to hunker down and I got to wait out this storm. But the Greek word that Paul and the author of Hebrews use here for patience, it's used actually throughout the whole entire New Testament, and it is not passive in its definition. It's not passive in the sense that we are waiting for something to happen, but rather it has an active tense to it. It means to be steadfast. It means to be constant. It means to endure. It is the characteristic of a man who is unswerved from his deliberate purpose and his loyalty and his piety to faith by even the greatest trials and sufferings. That his deliberate purpose and loyalty to faith is fulfilling his calling. And so hang on to your confidence and do not throw it away. Why? Because it will be richly rewarded. And when do we get that reward? When we have done the will of God. Continue to seek, continue to pursue, even when it doesn't make sense, even when you can't see, even in the darkest of the valleys. You see, so often we want our circumstances to change before we choose to step out. And we wait for the storm. We want to wait for the storm to clear, for this trial to be over, for the light to be kind of come into the valley floor before we decide to journey out. And don't get me wrong, there's certainly wisdom in this. But something that we have to ask ourselves is, am I waiting to get to shore before I step out of the boat? Or is Jesus calling me right now at this point to trust him and to get out and to walk on water? The journey through the valley, the treading on the valley floor produces patience and character and hope. But more than that, it creates a dependence on God because of who he is, and because he is our good shepherd who is always with us. And therefore, even when we are in the valley, we do not need to fear. Author David Tripp, he explained it this way. He said, God will take us where we do not want to go in order to produce in us what we could not achieve on our own. And author David Welch, he said, faith, true faith is expressed in the shadows. It is expressed in this valley of the shadow of death when we can't see or hear God clearly. And we say, Lord, help me to trust you because this loss feels like it's going to overwhelm me. And that trust that we are called to in the form of faith, that is so important. This past Thursday night at my home group, I was having a conversation with my friend Sarah. And we were talking about life and just the curveballs that life throws at us and how oftentimes those turn out to just kind of catch you. And well, anyway, life just is full of curveballs. And I told her, I said, 20 years ago, I never would have imagined myself to be a 44-year-old widower and a single dad to a 17-year-old daughter. My life now looks nothing like I thought it would 20 years ago. But I understand and I still believe that God is good. But I just wish I knew what his plan was. Yeah, I want to know what God is up to in the midst of everything that's going on. And on some level, I'll be honest, on some level, it bothers me to know that, it bothers me on some level to know that I may never know why my broken heart was a part of his plan. And yet I know at the same time that faith calls me to ultimately come to a place where I can say that it is well with my soul. And church, that's not just true for me, it's true for all of us. Amen? And so maybe some beauty in the ashes of this is I was leaving the cemetery today and you go there enough times and you kind of start to see the same people. And I walked over to a guy, I'd seen him numerous times. And as I was walking to the car, I just detoured over to him and I stopped and I said, tell me who you're here to visit. And for the next 30 minutes proceeded to tell me about his son that he'd lost 14 months ago. And in that, I got to share Jesus with him. I would not have had that opportunity had I not been there to visit my wife. Would not have been there to visit my wife had she not been called home. I'm sure you could have connected those dots, but I just thought I'd do that for you. God, because he is the good shepherd, will ultimately walk us out of this valley to a place of rest, back to another mountaintop where we will once again be able to see that path forward. But we don't necessarily get to know the timeline of when that will be, but his word assures us that he is always with us and that he will never forsake us. And so continuing in verse 4, David writes that I will fear no evil, for you are with me, and your rod and your staff, they comfort me. And that is why, again, that's why it's so important to know God's word and to know his promises, because regardless of how we feel, ultimately, it is the truth that needs to prevail, yes? It's the truth that needs to prevail. Our feelings will lead us astray. And we see it all over the world today as society encourages us to embrace how we feel, as if our feelings are equal to truth. Now, don't misunderstand me. It's important for us to recognize where we are, how we feel, but we must also make sure that our actions are not driven by our emotions. The truth is the written word of God, and it tells us multiple times that God will never leave us, and that he will always fight for us. Deuteronomy 20, verse 4 says, For the Lord your God is the one who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies to give you victory. And in Joshua 1:9, the Lord says, Have I not commanded you to be strong, be courageous, do not be afraid, do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. And in John 10:10, Jesus says that the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but I have come that they may have life and have it abundantly. Back to our psalm and continuing in verse 5, David says that you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil and my cup overflows. So David was a shepherd, he was a king, but he was also a soldier. And there were constant wars that were happening throughout his time, throughout his reign and the reigns of his entire lineage. We read it through the entire Old Testament, grabs for land, for resources, for servants, for riches, and kingdom expansions all over the nations in the Middle East. And so David, again, he's writing from a position of experience here and also truth in what he knew to be true of God. And I love how Charles Spurgeon, he describes this particular passage. He says that when a soldier is in the presence of his enemies, if he eats at all, he snatches a hasty meal and then he hastens away to the fight. But observe, thou preparest a table just as a servant does when she unfolds the damask cloth and displays the ornaments of the feast on an ordinary peaceful occasion. Nothing is hurried. There is no confusion. There's no disturbance. The enemy is at the door, and yet God prepares a table. And the Christian sits down and eats as if everything were in perfect peace. You see, God will always protect you. And it may not come in the form of what you think that should look like, but in his sovereignty, he will protect you. And so we finish with verse 6, when David says, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And so David, he starts the psalm by saying that the Lord is my shepherd. And again, the shepherd takes the lead. He walks in front. And then what David does in the psalm, he bookcases this psalm by saying, goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. And it gives this beautiful word picture of this protective bubble, almost like the Secret Service forms around the President of the United States. God goes before us, and he won't lead us anywhere that he doesn't go himself first. And we follow God, we follow Jesus, and then following us is his goodness, his sovereignty, his mercy, his grace, his love. Pastor Chuck Smith, he once said that we can often mistakenly believe the lie that if we just had enough faith, we would never have problems, that we would never experience the valley. And that obviously is not true. Faith will not, Pastor Chuck goes on to say that faith will not keep us from the valley of the shadow of death, but rather faith will sustain us while we are in the valley. That the greatest faith is not a faith that delivers you, but rather a faith that sustains you. Knowing the Lord will see you through it and that he is going to take care of it. Your goodness and your mercy shall follow me. Amen. And I love how David finishes this psalm. And he writes that I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Because the word dwell here in the Hebrew, it means to sit. It means, it's used in the context of being present in or returning to one's home. I am in the house of the Lord, which is now my home and is now an area for me to sit, to rest, to be restored forever. That's beautiful. And as I've sat with those final words of this psalm, for me, it's taken on new meaning because heaven has never felt closer than it has in these last 4 months. You pray with me. Lord, there are valleys, there are hills and there are valleys all around us, Lord. But we are so thankful for your truth, the truth that is so readily available to us in your written word. The truth of who you are, Lord, the unshakable truth, Lord, that you are our rock, you are our salvation, Lord. That there is absolutely nothing in this life that we have to fear. It doesn't mean that we won't, Lord. Our emotions frequently get the best of us. But we thank you for your love, your grace, Lord, in those times. We thank you, Lord, that you continue to speak to us, Lord. You continue to rescue us. Lord, this life is but a blink, and it's hard, and it's fun, and it's sad, and it's exciting. It sucks, and it's blessed, all at the same time. But it's temporary. And Lord, regardless of how many mountains and valleys, Lord, that we walk through, we know that this is not our home. And so we ask that you continue to write eternity on our hearts. Help us to be patient, Lord, until you call us home. And help us to always keep our eyes focused on you, Lord. And so excited for the day that we get to dwell in your house forever and ever and ever. Thank you for your goodness. Thank you for your salvation. Thank you for your love, your mercy. Thank you that you are our good shepherd, and that there is never a place that we go, that we find ourselves, where you have not first gone. In Jesus' name, amen.